In our headlines on this Thursday, October 23rd, here in South Korea. Presidential Chief of Staff for Policy Kim Yong-bom and Industry Minister Kim Jong-wan sit down with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick in Washington, D.C. for trade talks on Wednesday in a second face-to-face session in less than a week. Meanwhile, President Lee Jae-myung shares an optimistic outlook with regard to trade talks between Seoul and Washington, forecasting a rational result during an interview with American news channel CNN. And the Bank of Korea maintains its benchmark interest rate unchanged at 2.5% for the third session in a row, amid concerns over the foreign exchange market and housing prices. We start over in Washington, D.C., where South Korean and U.S. officials sat down for a second session of face-to-face talks in less than a week as part of efforts to reach a trade deal ahead of their leaders' meeting here in this part of the world next week. Our Moon Hye-ryun starts us off.
South Korea's Presidential Chief of Staff for Policy Kim Yong-bom and Industry Minister Kim Jong-wan met with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick in Washington for about 2 hours on Wednesday for their second round of in-person negotiations in less than a week. The discussions focused on the $350 billion investment package, a key part of the broader trade framework between the two countries. After the meeting, Policy Chief Kim said some progress was made, but stressed that negotiations are still ongoing.
There has been some progress. If we can meet more frequently before APEC, both sides will better understand each other's positions. But as always, in negotiations, nothing is over until it's truly over.
The talks are believed to have centered on the cash ratio and funding duration of the investment plan. The policy chief said that any agreement must remain within what South Korea can afford financially, without causing instability in the foreign exchange market, while the industry minister said that meeting face-to-face was crucial to resolving the few remaining issues.
There are still pending issues. While we've discussed them online, we thought meeting in person would be far more effective, so we decided to come.
Meanwhile, Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chol, who has been negotiating with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, told Bloomberg TV that the focus is on structuring the $350 billion investment rather than on establishing a currency swap. He added that Seoul is working towards a balanced mix of direct investment, loans and guarantees, noting that a full upfront payment could shock the Korean foreign exchange market. Koo also emphasized that resolving the tariff gap, currently 25% for Korean vehicles versus 15% for Japanese ones, would help reduce uncertainty and stabilize the Korean won. With the South Korea-US summit expected to take place during the APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju at the end of the month, Wednesday's talks likely mark the final push as both sides work to seal a deal. Moon Hye-ryun, Arirang News.
The central bank here has decided to maintain its benchmark interest rate unchanged at 2.5% for the third session in a row amid concerns over the foreign exchange market and housing prices. Our economic correspondent Park Jun-han reports.
The Bank of Korea announced a third rate freeze of the country's base interest rate at 2.5% on Thursday, after cutting the rate by 25 basis points in May and holding it steady in July and August. The decision was widely expected as Central Bank Governor Lee Chang-yong said during a National Assembly audit on Monday that he intends to prevent additional liquidity from overheating the property market.
While inflation remains stable, uncertainties in growth persist. With ongoing improvements in consumption and exports, and given the need to monitor the housing market, household debt, and exchange rate volatility, we decided to keep the interest rate unchanged.
A professor of economics also pointed to the volatile foreign exchange market as one of the main reasons why the BOK is unable to make a preemptive rate cut. While the dollar index remains below 100, the $1 exchange rate has been hovering around 1,430 Korean won per US dollar as of October, which is considered high compared to historical data.
The Korean won has become volatile recently, partly due to the uncertainty over trade policy. especially the questions surrounding the $350 billion investment agreement between Korea and the U.S. In this environment, the bank wanted to avoid adding further instability to the currency market.
Following the bank's move, the interest rate gap between South Korea and the United States remains in the 1.5 to 1.75 percentage point range. Eyes are now on whether the central bank will lower the country's interest rate in November. With internal and external factors such as high housing prices, a volatile foreign exchange market, and the upcoming U.S. interest rate decision in October, the BOK said the agency will closely monitor the market and act accordingly. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung says strengthening South Korea's self-defense capabilities is key to maintaining peace on the Korean peninsula and promoting sustainable economic growth. At a weekly meeting with his top aides on this Thursday, the president called for substantial investments in the defense industry, making note of the rising global demand. Remarks to this end follow the top office's designation of this week as Defense Week. President Lee also urged relevant ministries to exert all efforts in preparation for next week's APEC leaders' meeting. He stressed that the event should serve as an opportunity for the international community to address shared challenges such as AI transformation and demographic shifts. And the president has shared an optimistic outlook with regard to trade talks between Seoul and Washington, forecasting a rational result. The remarks to this end were shared during an interview with American news channel CNN. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
Ahead of a high-stakes meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump next week and amid complicated trade talks, President Lee Jae-myung says he believes in the rationality of the United States when it comes to the trade issue. In an interview with CNN a week before the APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju, Lee said it'll take a lot of time and effort, but he believes a rational agreement will be reached in the end. The allies are currently struggling to narrow key differences, including Trump's demand that Seoul makes a $350 billion investment upfront in return for lowered tariffs. When asked about that such demand is tantamount to a mafia shakedown and extortion on America's allies, the South Korean leader added he expects a rational result because the two countries are in an alliance and have common sense and rationality. On a possible meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in time for the APEC meeting, President Lee said he would welcome it if they met and supports their talks, though he sees little chance of it happening next week. When asked what his message would be to North Korea's Kim, Lee said meeting his counterpart would be the first step in resolving many issues. He earlier suggested that Trump could take on the role of a peacemaker and him as a pacemaker when they met at the White House in August as part of efforts to lower tensions on the peninsula. In 2019, Kim Jong-un and Trump had a surprise meeting at the DMZ 4 months after their talks in Hanoi fell apart. The upcoming gathering of 21 APEC member economies comes at a time of deep division and growing global uncertainties, with a focus on key summit diplomacy and America's sweeping tariff campaign on the world. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
And speaking of next week's APEC leaders meeting, it's not just the gathering of global leaders that's making headlines. The APEC CEO summit is garnering much attention amid news that the head of NVIDIA will be attending the event. Our Pyongyang has more.
AI revolutionary Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA, is returning to Korea for the first time in 15 years. Huang will attend the APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju later this month, after years of skipping Seoul on his Asian tours. He's scheduled to deliver a press conference and keynote speech on the final day of the event. He's also expected to meet SK Group Chairman Itaewon and Samsung Electronics Chairman Lee Jae-yong, as the two South Korean chip giants supply high-bandwidth memory chips, or HBM, to NVIDIA.
One company is ordering nearly half of the world's total memory chips, and Korea's chip makers are joining forces to meet that demand.
I'm confident that this collaboration will allow Korea to take a central role in leading the global AI paradigm and opening new frontiers for the future.
Their discussions will likely center on next-generation semiconductor technology, as well as ways to strengthen cooperation in AI development. There's even speculation that Huang could tour chip production lines during his stay. Top executives from global tech giants, including Google, Meta, and Microsoft, are also expected to attend. SoftBank's Masayoshi Son and OpenAI's Sam Altman are reportedly considering joining as well. If their visits materialize, analysts say it could give further momentum to the so-called Stargate project, a U.S.-led initiative to build next-generation AI data centers worldwide. Held under the theme Bridge Business Beyond, this year's APEC leaders meeting aims to connect world leaders and global CEOs through one-on-one meetings to explore new investment and partnership opportunities. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
On the international front, U.S. President Donald Trump cancels his summit with Russia's Vladimir Putin and slaps sanctions on two major Russian oil companies. Our correspondent Kim Bo-kyung tells us why.
Unexpected summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin has been cancelled. During his meeting with the NATO Secretary General in the Oval Office on Wednesday, Trump told reporters that it just didn't feel right.
We canceled the meeting with President Putin. It didn't feel right to me. It didn't feel like we were going to get to the place we have to get, so I canceled it. But we'll do it in the future.
Trump instead added that he has a long meeting schedule with Chinese leader Xi Jinping and that he expects to reach a trade agreement with him where he could raise concerns about China's purchases of Russian oil. His words come in line with Washington having imposed the first Ukraine-related sanctions on Russia since the start of his second term. The sanctions announced on Wednesday target Russia's two largest oil giants, Lukoil and Rosneft. The U.S. Treasury Department said it is prepared to take further action and urged Moscow to agree to an immediate ceasefire. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Wednesday in Oslo that he backs Trump's proposal for Ukraine and Russia to stop at the current front lines was a good compromise.
After our conversation, you saw messages, public messages from Trump. He proposed stay where we stay and begin conversation. I think that was good compromise, but I'm not sure that Putin will support it, and I said it to the president.
Given that this comes amid Putin demanding that Trump give him the entire Donetsk region in eastern Ukraine, The Guardian viewed Trump's proposal as a modest win for Zelensky, though he keeps wavering on key aspects of the war. According to the Wall Street Journal on Wednesday, with disappointment leveled at Putin for not making significant progress in discussing a ceasefire, Trump may have dropped the limitations on Ukraine's use of long-range missiles. In fact, Ukraine did use a British Storm Shadow cruise missile to strike Russia, which originally needed approval from the U.S. Secretary of Defense. The authority to approve such attacks was returned to the U.S. military's European Command, and though Trump claimed that this was fake news, many say the reversal could be because talks with Putin are not making progress. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
North Korea has stolen billions of dollars in virtual assets. Now, this is according to the latest report by the Multilateral Sanctions Monitoring Team. From January 2024 to September 2025, Pyongyang reportedly stole over $2.8 billion in virtual assets. The regime has been using China's financial systems as well as those in Cambodia to launder these assets. The report adds IT workers engaged in illicit crypto activities were based in at least 8 countries, including China, Russia, and Cambodia. And North Korea has confirmed Wednesday's launch of ballistic missiles. Earlier this morning, the regime claimed it had tested a new hypersonic system. Our Lee Seung-jae has details.
North Korea announced Thursday that it successfully test-fired 2 hypersonic projectiles, describing them as part of a new and important weapons system. According to the Korean Central News Agency, the two projectiles were launched the day before from Yeokpo district in Pyongyang toward the northeast and hit their intended target on the Gwaesang Peak tableland in Arirang County, North Hamgyong Province. The KCNA said the test was part of the country's broader defense capability development program, designed to strengthen the sustainability and effectiveness of what Pyongyang calls its strategic deterrence against potential enemies. While top military officials were at the test site to observe, the regime's leader, Kim Jong-un, was not. This marks the first ballistic missile test by North Korea in 167 days since the regime fired multiple short-range missiles, including the Hwasong-11 on May 8th. It also comes just days before the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Gyeongju, where leaders from South Korea, the United States, and China are expected to discuss the North's growing missile threats. In response, the United States condemned the launches, calling them unlawful and destabilizing. A spokesperson for the U.S. Department of Defense said Washington is closely consulting with South Korea, Japan, and regional allies following the test, reaffirming America's ironclad security commitment to its partners in Northeast Asia. The spokesperson added that the U.S. strongly urges Pyongyang to refrain from further provocations. In Europe, EU Foreign Affairs spokesperson Anita Hipper also condemned the missile tests on social media, calling them a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions. She stated that North Korea must cease all unlawful actions that threaten peace and security, return to diplomacy, and fulfill its international obligations. The latest test underscores heightened tensions on the Korean peninsula as Pyongyang seeks to demonstrate its military capabilities ahead of key international discussions. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The government has made public the results of a special audit into the deadly 2022 Itaewon crowd crush, conducted by a task force made up of the Office for Government Policy Coordination, the Interior Ministry, and the Korean National Police Agency. Since July, the audit found that no security personnel had been deployed to the area on the day of the accident, as police resources had been concentrated near the Yongsan Presidential Office. The audit also showed that Yongsan-gu district officials on duty that night failed to take immediate action despite being informed of the large crowds. The task force will hold 62 public officials accountable for the tragic loss of lives that fateful night. The audit was launched upon request from the victims' families as the 3-year deadline for disciplinary action approaches next week. In other news, the world's semiconductor giants are gathered here in Seoul for an annual exhibition that showcases the latest in the chip technologies. Our Moon Ji-young was there.
In the midst of a paradigm shift driven by AI, the future competitiveness of the semiconductor ecosystem is becoming increasingly crucial. Against this backdrop, marking its 27th anniversary, the Semiconductor exhibition commenced in Seoul on Wednesday, showcasing the entire spectrum of the semiconductor industry's supply chain. In the AI era, with semiconductor technology at the core, this year's event highlights a seamless integration of Korea's semiconductor ecosystem, design, manufacturing, and post-processing. Samsung Electronics unveiled a physical HBM4, a 6th-generation high-bandwidth memory chip. The company has not only completed development of its 12-layer HBM4, but is also actively accelerating preparations for mass production. Furthermore, Samsung showcased its broad portfolio, ranging from the 7th-generation GDDR7 graphics DRAM, currently supplied in large volumes to NVIDIA, to advanced system semiconductors and foundry services. Meanwhile, another industry leader, SK Hynix, prominently positioned its HBM4 exhibition at the booth center. Notably, the company had already supplied HBM4 samples to key customers such as NVIDIA as early as March, outpacing its competitors. It also introduced innovative memory module solutions specifically optimized for data centers and AI servers, alongside advanced storage solutions tailored for AI data centers and cloud infrastructure. Beyond these industry giants, Family's firms showcase their latest innovations, including intellectual property technology, logic processing units, and vehicle-to-infrastructure solutions. Furthermore, domestic materials, parts, and equipment companies demonstrated their advanced manufacturing technologies, underpinning the entire semiconductor production process. Running through this Friday, the show brings together 280 global semiconductor manufacturing and equipment companies exhibiting across 700 booths and is expected to attract more than 60,000 industry professionals. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. In Washington on Wednesday, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed that the U.S. military carried out an airstrike on Tuesday night in the eastern Pacific Ocean, destroying a suspected drug-carrying vessel and killing 2 people. It is the 8th U.S. strike against alleged cartel boats since operations began last month and is the first strike outside the Caribbean. A total of 34 people have been killed by the airstrikes. The U.S. Defense Secretary compared the airstrikes to the post-9/11 war on terrorism, saying, quote, "These cartels are waging war on our border and our people. There will be no refuge or forgiveness." The Trump administration claims the U.S. is in an armed conflict with drug cartels, designating them unlawful combatants under the same legal authority used in the war on terror. Some members of Congress are now demanding oversight, questioning the legality and the transparency of the airstrikes. In New York on Tuesday, an immigration enforcement sweep in Manhattan's Chinatown spiraled into chaos when a crowd of residents surrounded federal agents, blocking vehicles and clashing with officers during rush hour. The confrontation began around 4 p.m. as Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Border Patrol, and other federal agents moved along Canal Street, detaining vendors accused of selling counterfeit goods. A news reporter witnessed officers arresting at least one vendor selling phone cases before protesters gathered, chanting, quote, "ICE out of New York." According to the Department of Homeland Security, at least one person was arrested for assaulting an officer during the operation. New York City officials said Mayor Eric Adams had no prior knowledge of the sweep, condemning it as a misuse of law enforcement resources. In western Uganda early Wednesday, at least 46 people were killed when 2 buses and 2 other vehicles collided on the highway between Kampala and Gulu near the town of Kirandongo. The crash happened just after midnight Tuesday local time when both buses tried to overtake a truck and a car and slammed head-on to each other. A Ugandan Red Cross spokesperson described the scenes of, quote, bleeding victims and broken limbs, calling it one of the country's most devastating road accidents. Authorities say reckless overtaking and speeding remain the leading causes of crashes on Uganda's narrow highways. Investigators are continuing to examine the cause of the crash. Researchers in the U.S. have found that some COVID-19 vaccines may help cancer patients live longer. The researchers at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston and the University of Florida found that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines may help some cancer patients by strengthening their immune response to treatment. The study, published on Wednesday in the journal Nature, analyzed nearly 1,000 patients with advanced lung and skin cancers taking checkpoint inhibitor drugs. Those who received an mRNA vaccine within 100 days of starting therapy had significantly higher survival rates, with lung cancer patient 3-year survival rates nearly doubling. Scientists say the mRNA molecule that powers the vaccines act like a siren, activating immune cells throughout the body. The findings are preliminary, but researchers are planning larger trials to test pairing mRNA vaccines with cancer immunotherapy. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
Today is Hanggang on the traditional calendar, which means the season when the frost begins to fall. With cool autumn conditions everywhere, the daytime temperature rose up to 19 degrees Celsius in Seoul and 22 degrees in Gwangju, slightly above the average temperature for this time of year. Meanwhile, it's still raining on and off on the East Coast as rain clouds are covering parts of Gangwon-do province and Gyeongsang-buk-do province, where rain is expected around these areas. As much as 100 millimeters of heavy rain is forecast in northeastern Gangwon-do province until tomorrow. Most areas will start off in the double digits tomorrow, with Seoul, Daejeon, Daegu, and Gyeongju at 10 degrees. Daily highs will rise up to around 18 to 22 degrees nationwide. After this week, the weather will start to get colder and colder. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session. Do stay with us and thank you for now.